So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end, as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we find then these layers of the spring and autumn feasts very precisely recorded on the 61st chapter of this great prophet. However, we should ask ourselves, what is going on then in the world that's causing so many nations to neglect this great prophet on behalf of their own dreams and wishes for the future of this planet? Let's then make an evaluation of what the Messiah himself has said as far as him being tabernacling, and he was then the light of the world during his time of service. The spring feast was no joke. It was a very serious time in the history of this planet, and the Messiah came and he completed his objective. Now, as far as we can understand, most of the people of his time did not like him. So then, why sometimes in congregations the people sometimes they don't talk very often of the Messiah and the prophets? So let's make an analysis why people they tended to stay away from the teachings of the Messiah and also the teachings of the prophets. We can be sure of it, a great portion of these it's because they get self-conscious of the understanding of Israel has destroyed its own prophets. And then let's make an understanding very clear as far as what people should be doing in order to save their souls and doing what the Messiah said to do versus wishing a world in this particular world truly does not exist. So the question is very simple. The Messiah himself, when he was completing the spring feast, he was absolutely concerned of doing what the prophets said. Yet, this world we live in, simply many congregations, they neglect speaking of what the prophets said. Maybe because it generates so much conversations and viewpoints and interpretations. But the situation is the events are very plainly given versus then the instructions are also plainly given as far as what the prophets said. Now, during the time of the Messiah, in the 24th chapter of Yeshayahu, he was there teaching them, yet the people, they were leaning the conversation and the events on their own behalf of what they wished for the future of the nation, versus then the Messiah going the other direction. The Messiah was solely concerned with the instructions and the prophets. Israel wanted what Solomon had. They wanted the Messiah to restore Israel as during the time of Solomon or Solomon. So the disparity of understanding is very great. Let's make an analysis of what's going on in the political arena of Israel And let's make an analysis. Why then the Prime Minister of Israel at this point in time decided to get rid of the Financial Minister and the Justice Minister, both of them from the left wing, though what they were explaining was true. Israel's economy is not doing very nicely, and they should promote ways of increasing the economy of Israel. And because of these, and those situations were true, and they were fired. So then, as far as the election, Israel had another couple of years of mandate until elections. But because of many of the world's events are taking place in March next year, the Prime Minister of Israel decided, not because of divine guidance, he decided on his own. Because Great Britain is going through elections in 4 months' time, and then the great event of mobile systems also is in March, and he decided himself to have elections in March. So it's purely political motivation. There is absolutely not a hint of divine guidance. Now, people through ignorance, they want to make regular, plain, humane, fleshly decisions as divine. And there is no link with it. So then, what can we expect as far as congregations doing what the Messiah said to do? They are simply very slim. Why then, in the regular sense, these becoming absolutely nonsense as far as trying to find divine in a congregation where they are acting in the flesh? It is very simple. We find these in the Holy Instructions. Let's evaluate very precisely where do we find the invasion of the land of Israel. Why then there are so many wishes being said and encouraged where we find absolutely the contrary reported by the prophet Daniel. Now people may argue and they say, it's only interpretation. Okay, it's interpretation. However, it's an interpretation given plainly by the prophet himself. So let's read. Then explains a section of the Holy Instructions where then the southern kingdom, or then the violent ones, are engaged with the war as far as Egypt. It was explained before many times, the sons of Ishmael, they're going to make Egypt their headquarters. It's going to be done like this. You can read by yourself. Then there are the skirmishes in Egypt until the sons of Ishmael, they make Egypt as their headquarters. Then the Soviets must then arm Egypt yet. Later on, we find then the skirmishes then they are simply calmed down. Then Egypt, nicely armed, they are in line with the sons of Ishmael. Thus then Hagar's quest of her own people then are in line for the next event. Then the sons of Ishmael, or then the Islamic State, becomes extremely powerful. Then the violent ones of the southern area, then they stand up to establish division, because they are afraid that the Islamic State is going to make them part of their own kingdom. Then they pointed out this vision must be established. Then you find, and later on, these then vision established. Then you find the city on the land of Cush then fortified. Then you find the kingdom of the north protecting this new city. Then later on you find that these kingdom of the south, then the Ishmaelites, they're going to try to come against the holy city fortified, and they won't be able to take it. Later on we find these then, understandably, the power of the southern kingdom, or the sons of Ishmael, or the Ishmaelites, are so great. And then comes a point where then they invade the glorious land. This means Israel. The region then is taken by the Ishmaelites. Let's read where this is going to take place. Then you find, but he that comes to him or against him will to do as he wills, and none of them shall stand before him, and he shall stand in a glorious land. It's absolutely straightforward. The Ishmaelites are going to try to come against the holy city, and the holy city is fortified. Then they can't take the holy city on the land of Cush. Then they directed their anger and their desire for conquest towards Israel itself, and they will take it. That's what the prophet Daniel has explained. Now, the situation is, you may try to find then, who is this he that takes over? It's the very people that we named today the ISIL, or the Islamic State. And the big hint of the whole situation is the Temple Mount, where they used to have a temple over there, is a Muslim shrine. Dome of the Rock. Later on, you find then more skirmishes, and then there is a whole section where then you find the despised one, or then United States, being involved with this situation in the Middle East, where then later they are involved also with this invasion of the Ishmaelites in Israel. By this time there is a whole section of a relationship of the kingdom of the south, Israel, and also the new holy city on the land of Cush. Also there is a mixture of the northern kingdom amongst these. So we know then, by reading Prophet Daniel, you can find the answers very easily. Now let me ask you this. Are people then engaged in finding answers from the prophets, or they are wishing a virtual world does not exist? We must face what the prophets are teaching us and make preparations, so then we find ourselves on a holy path. Otherwise we are going to do precisely as Israel of old did, destroying its own prophets because of their own wishes. So let's make preparations, because the Ishmaelites are going to invade the Holy Land, as precisely stated by the prophet Daniel. During the time of Yirmiyahu and Yerishiyahu, there was always an understanding of, one prophet was saying that Israel were always going to stand, versus a prophet that said that Israel is going to be destroyed. Yirmiyahu was right. So it was Yeshayahu. However, Yeshayahu gave us the understanding of Israel as tabernacling, and tabernacling of the second tabernacle services on the land of Cush. As we know the story, when Yirmiyahu the prophet was explaining the Babylons are coming, and the Babylons are coming, and they're going to destroy the land. And Israel mistreated Yirmiyahu very badly. And sure enough, later on, Babylon came and destroyed the land. And they were in exile for 70 years. Because Israel, by the time they owned the land, they never kept the yearly Shabbat in order for the land to rest. Thus they were in exile. So we are during the time of the restoration period. It's no longer a time of 1,000 years of deceit where nations, they concocted theories and desires of their own and wishes, and they manipulated their way through until they get what they wanted. Those times are gone. We are going to do precisely what the prophets said to do. Next time we're going to evaluate more the situation, because what's coming then, it is very serious. Now, if you want to save your own soul, not mine, then the recommendation is read the instructions and do what it says for your own benefit. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up.